Oysters in Oxford, Maryland are glowing.
So we're just using these tools to allow us to see the oysters that have been tagged.
Jason Spires is the researcher who developed a new kind of tag to track oyster stock at NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science Lab.
So that small green circle is the size of the oyster at the time that it was exposed to the marker.
To show Bay Bulletin his work, the overhead lights are turned off, a blue light on his flashlight is turned on, and he wears glasses that have the right filter. Our camera also needed a filter to see the marking that was placed in 2016.
So we're looking at about a 3.5-inch adult oyster, an eastern oyster, that has been tagged when it was much smaller, about 3.5 years ago, with a fluorochrome dye that was incorporated into the shell that was growing.
It's in the shell, not the meat. Spires says the dye is calcine, approved by the FDA and used for decades on fish. The public can't buy it, but he had the idea to use it on oysters, which are tough to mark with a physical tag.
Researchers need a way to determine whether or not their stocking efforts are working, if the individuals that they're introducing are surviving, if they're growing, if they're migrating. So they use tags.
And now Spires knows that tag will last at least 3.5 years. He brought these oysters in the lab to show us the green light. Our underwater camera shows the cage coming back up and out of the Tredevan River. The pier is right behind the lab. He placed the bucket back in and will let more time go by to test the 3,000 tagged oysters.
Oysters can live a very long time, so we want to see how long that mark will last.
He says the tag could also be a tool for law enforcement officers to track down poachers. Stephanie WESTBY is the Oyster Restoration Program Director. She and Spires worked together last summer to see if larvae, that's the eggs that are fertilized, could also be tagged. They dropped these bags of shells into the river.
So we had this idea for a while that maybe a very efficient way to get oysters onto a new oyster reef would be to take the larval oysters that are produced in a hatchery and release them directly onto a reef and see, do they all just get washed away or do they all stay there? Happily, we found that all of the oysters that we looked at back in the lab did in fact glow, so we know that those larvae from the hatchery are the same oysters.
WESTBY says direct deployment could be more cost efficient for producing oysters. If you want to get a closer look at some of the work that's happening here at the lab, you have a chance to do so on April 25th. That's Oxford Day. You can even hold one of the oysters and check out the tag under the light. You might also be able to get a glimpse of the demonstration oyster restoration reef, where you can see oysters growing vertically in the water column. The oysters that were made using that direct setting technique have also been planted here.
At this phase of the work, we want to learn how long the tag will last.
A glowing report for researchers who say it's a first for using that chemical dye to tag juvenile eastern oysters. For Chesapeake Bay Media's Bay Bulletin, I'm CHERYL COSTELLO.